Hey friends, this is Marilyn from Tarot Clarity. Today is actually October 29th, but you'll be seeing this on the 30th. And I want to make reference to this morning's short that I did, which acknowledged that Atlas 3i, or 3i Atlas rather, went through our solar system, at least as far as I know today, October 29th. There's been no catastrophe or anything, just went through to whatever its intention was. It's done with its business here and it's moving forward. And then I also wanted to acknowledge in that short that it was the anniversary of the War of the Worlds that was broadcast through Mercury Theater in 1938, which really shook up quite a few people who tuned in that night to listen to Orson Welles' broadcast. And I just thought it would be fun to acknowledge that today, because today is the anniversary. I guess it was 1938. So it'd be like 87 years. It's almost 90 years ago. It's crazy. And, there are people who are still living, who have that in their memory from childhood. My mother, she's been deceased now, but my mother remembered not hearing it because she was too little, she said. But she remembered the adults talking about it, and it was part of popular culture for a period of time. I don't think her parents, either they weren't watching it or they never fell for it or something. They weren't concerned. They probably not watching it. It's just part of the language to say watching. That they either never listened to the broadcast or they heard about it after the fact. But my husband's a number of years older than I, and he remembered it because his mother was like 17 at the time. And he remembered his mother saying they fell for it. They were listening to it and they fell for it, So, and now she's been dead a number of years too. She was 102 when she died. But I'm just saying that there may be people who have children, there might be children who are in their 90s who might remember it, or in their late 80s or something like that. But the best I can come up with is just recalling the memory of my mother. I never asked my father about it. The only reason I asked my mother about it was because when I was an art teacher, I wanted to do something fun with the kids for Halloween. And I had learned when I was doing my research that October 30th was the date that the broadcast took place. So I decided on that date to play the broadcast for them. And they were teenagers, so I figured, they'll probably, crucify me with this. But I thought it was important, and I thought, these kids are never going to hear it they're never going to hear it otherwise. So I told them, I prefaced it. I said, this is what went down, so bear it in mind. And of course, the project for the next 2 days was to do a painting of the aliens or their interpretation. So for that reason, they loved it. So they did listen. And it was so at any rate, when I was going to do that assignment, I asked my mom, I was like, do you remember anything about this? I knew you were a baby, but that's when she told me. So we didn't just naturally spontaneously say, do you remember the War of the Worlds? It was more because something made me think of it, and I asked her. Okay, so most of you who follow me, and thank you for being subscribers, thank you for being members, thank you for pushing the hype button, thank you for hitting like, share, watching to the end, anything you do to help this channel grow. I appreciate it very much because it's the only way that I can keep this channel going in the level that you're accustomed to, seeing new decks and seeing me use them. So those of you who have been aware that I did purchase Marco Benedetti's, where the heck did I put it? Hold on. If it had teeth, it would have bitten me. I did recently purchase Marco's Barattini's, I call it the second generation Metelli. And I won't get into how it's connected to the Metelli, except to say that it's connected to the Metelli, and watch my first 2 videos. But anyway, when I get a new deck, what I like to do is showcase it by itself and then show a side-by-side comparison if it's historically connected to another deck. And then I always like to do a few readings with it by itself to show you guys how it reads. oh, I hate to take it out of order. It's in order. Now remember, I had mentioned this in the videos before, that I think in the Barattini ran this on the press as though this were the fool and this were the magician, or the El Bagato. But I'm taking a stand on this. I think in the Metelli, it was this way rather than this way. And it could just be by chance of how the cards were printed. It may have nothing to do with anything, but chances are good it does, you know. But I'm going to take a stand and say that this is the fool and that this is the Il Bagato. However, I think if you have this deck and you see it otherwise, I see no reason why you should be beholden to my opinion. So, oh, I hate to shuffle a deck that's in order. Only because I don't, you know, I'll go probably 30 seconds in, I'll realize I had to do another comparison. But I'm going to shuffle this deck, come up with a question or two that would be great to use for it. And I'll be right back. Alrighty. You may be expecting for this question for me to have used one of my Fortuna decks, and I probably would have if I wasn't trying to showcase this deck, but I think I'm going to use this deck anyway, just to tap into the energy of the folks who happen to live in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, on October 30th, 1938. Now, cleverly, Orson Welles, in his story, in his broadcast rather, said that it was near Grover's Mill, which was very clever because it's a clever distinction, because it meant that it wasn't necessarily in Grover's Mill, but it was close to it. So that would, you know, that would mean anybody looking out of the window at Grover's Mill wouldn't necessarily see aliens or be, you know. However, there was an individual who, folklore has it, that he did, and he shot at the water tower because it was described, the aliens in the broadcast were described as having long legs, as did this particular water tower, of course, and so he shot at it. And that water tower still exists, and pretty much our mecca to Grover's Mill was to see that water tower, which we could just see. It's just still barely standing after all these years, but it's still there. So I just want to tap into the energy. I really do. I want to tap into the energy of the folks, 1938, their universe, who happened to be tuned in that night. Okay, so it was a community thing, right? I see batons as community, and 6, you know, being a perfect number. So maybe the community, I imagine that it wasn't a very populated area. I think it was primarily farmland. And I had never been there except to go up there yesterday with, you know, my husband. And it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. But we both had the feeling that the older houses there were like farmhouses, so it must have just been like farm. I'm guessing. So it must have been a tight community. So those of the community who might have been aware of what was happening, they bonded together. Just from this first card, I can tell. Okay, we have the Ace of Coins. Maybe they pooled their resources. Now, the Ace is just one. It's not like a bunch that they got together. But we'll see what else comes after, you know, in the rest of the spread. But they might have pooled their resources together. Okay, yeah, they definitely pooled their resources. All for one and one for all. So that's really encouraging to see that. Excuse me, I gotta adjust this. Okay, so, wow, they were tightly wound. they front and center of the core 9. Let's see what else we have here. So they were, and then we have a 7. So we have a 7 of Swords. So there might have been some who got together to protect the community, which would explain the gentleman who went out and shot the shot the water tower we saw, and then we have an 8. Now I shuffled this very well. And it's really hard to shuffle a deck like this really well because I baby it, but I did it. I did extra even. Okay, so we have the Wheel of Fortune. A change. Toward what? Oh my goodness. So they were seeing it as like the end of the good life to this. That's something. So there must have been some fear. That was short-lived. So it must have been a mixed bag, of feeling like their world was coming to an end, with this awful evil that they imagined was happening. But then, of course, the broadcast was only an hour long, so it was short-lived for them. But they went through the emotions, and they bonded together. The good that came out of it was that they bonded together. Some people did take up arms, for sure. They took up arms, But for the most part, it seemed like it was a quick realization that went from dread and terror to happy news. Just for ish and giggles, let's add up what the quint cards would be. And for those of you who are not familiar with this spread, I have a tutorial on my signature spread, which I've done a couple of videos ago, so please go find it. It'll explain how this particular spread is done. Alrighty, now with this deck, we have to bear in mind that the numbers are not the standard numbers. So 7 in this row, 7 with the quint cards all together, would have been temperance in this deck. So there will be differences. And you'll see that I had to pull a card from my Metelli because 10 is already in play. And I think it's very interesting that 10 begins and ends this row with a mirror image. That is just so cool. Now I'm going to show these two cards because although I did do a comparison side by side, for those of you who didn't catch it or don't intend to, I just want to point out that in the Metelli, we do have the hand of the master, right? We do have the subtlety in the hand of the master. And this, we have someone who copied the master. So there's that difference. Now, these two cards, as dramatic as they are, in particular this one, I think pretty much what this row shows is that the whole experience might have ended up being a cash cow for the town. Like they ended up being okay, no worse for the wear. And there might have been some people who got themselves all worked up. It does seem that there might have been some people who got worked up, but for the most part, they were cooperative with one another. The ones that were upset, right? They were cooperative. They pooled together. And it seemed that they kind of took it on the level, like they were okay. They were, I don't know. I get the feeling that there might have been a few that got worked up and everything, but I think, after all was said and done, they just were fine. They weren't like, and in fact, I think maybe the town ended up being put on the map for that reason, So this might have ended up being a little bit of a cash cow. I mean, I know we went to a coffee shop that cashed in on it, cashed in on the name of the town. And when you walked in, it was all alien stuff, whole alien memorabilia and memorabilia from that period of time in the broadcast. So it probably did the town some good. And that's what the feeling I get. Now, if you're from Grover's Mill and you don't feel that way, then please let me know. But that's the impression I get, that this row just sort of suggests they did okay by it. And they had level heads. And perhaps the women had the most level heads of all. We have this card would be the number 3 card, and this is the card that falls for number 3. It's not traditionally the Empress, but we do have a feminine form. And she was maybe the women folk were standing by with their rifles, that could be. They could be. Well, their menfolk were doing whatever the menfolk were doing. And this is the star card, not the hermit. So bear that in mind. It's the star card, number 16. And it's possible, if we compare this to the Metelli that Marco published doesn't have numbers on it, and I don't know if Marco did that for us so that we don't have to flip-flop back and forth, but it's distinctly possible that the Metelli did have these numbers on it. And, that that Barattini just copied the traditional numbers. So that's an interesting spot you've put me in now, Marco. But when I use the Barattini, I'm going to honor the Barattini, right? Let me see. Let me make sure the 10 was, 10 was the Wheel of Fortune. Yeah, okay. When I use the Barattini, I'm going to honor the Barattini. If I'm using the Metelli, I'm going to honor the Metelli. That's how I'm going to work on this. So, well, it did happen at night, and it was about aliens, and maybe some people took off. That's possible. They packed up their belongings and they were ready to head out, man. Maybe they did. Maybe they got on their little horse and buggy or whatever in 1938 the farmers might have had. I guess they had trucks, right? Definitely they had trucks. Or maybe they packed up on their pickup trucks and took off. Some of them maybe, who knows? Who knows? But the whole thing was just kind of not comical, but if you put yourself in the period of time in the 1930s when folks were really trying to escape what was happening in the world, much like we are today, and they had the Hollywood movies, which was escapism, right? And they had the willing suspension of disbelief, where impossible scenarios took place every day in the movies. And they watched the movies and they fell for it, right? And when I do my movie series, and I have to start getting back on that because I miss doing it. But there's so many plot holes that we miss when we watch a movie because we just allow it and we just fall for it, right? And I think that was what, because they were already in that realm of the willing suspension of disbelief, that an hour-long broadcast could come on, tell everybody they're being invaded by the Martians, right? And have people actually believe it and not pay attention to the fact that a professor that they interviewed in Princeton only took 4 minutes to get to Miller's Grove, which was 20 miles away. And 20 miles in 1938, not the speed of light. The professor from Princeton got to Grover's Mill in like 4 minutes. Right? Now, who could believe that other than having the willing suspension of disbelief, right? Which was already part of the culture, I think, with the movies. That's just me saying that, not any history book or anything like that. It's just me making an observation, At any rate, this is a beautiful deck. I'm so happy that I was able to use one of my Metellis as the quint card, so I'm so delighted to have a quint card backup for each of these decks. And for the few it scared, it was horrible, but it only lasted but a brief minute, and they made the most of it, surely. Almost 90 years later, they have people come to their town and spend money in their town doing things. So until next time, friends, peace, stay well, be brave, and be kind.